Snoop Dogg boarded a private flight expecting peace and luxury. But what happened in the air changed everything. You won't believe the shocking events that unfolded. Stay until the end to uncover the full story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support makes a difference. Snoop Dogg leaned back in his luxurious seat, his sunglasses perched comfortably on his nose as he scrolled through his playlist on his phone. This was a trip he had been dreaming of for months, a well-deserved vacation to the pristine beaches of the Maldives. Life had been hectic lately, with tours, recording sessions, and an unending cycle of commitments. For once, he was allowing himself to unwind. The private jet was a marvel of modern comfort. The plush leather seats, the ambient lighting, and the attentive crew made it feel more like a luxury hotel than an aircraft. Snoop nodded in appreciation as a flight attendant approached with a glass of freshly pressed juice. "Here you go, Mr. Broaddus," she said with a warm smile, addressing him by his real name. "If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you, sweetheart," he replied smoothly, taking the glass and raising it in a mock toast. "Y'all outdone yourselves with this setup." The plane began taxiing to the runway, and the soft hum of the engines filled the cabin. Snoop adjusted his seat, glancing briefly at the other passengers. Most seemed to be well-to-do individuals traveling for business or leisure, and they appeared more interested in their own affairs than in recognizing a world-famous rap icon. As the plane lifted off the ground, Snoop felt the usual thrill of flight, mixed with the relief of leaving behind the relentless demands of his daily life. He reached for his tablet and started jotting down ideas for a new track, his mind buzzing with creativity. The hum of the engines and the subtle vibrations of the aircraft provided an oddly inspiring backdrop. Hours into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed slightly, signaling the transition to nighttime. Snoop reclined his seat and closed his eyes, allowing the gentle motion of the plane to lull him into a light doze. The staff continued to move quietly, ensuring everyone's comfort without disturbing the serene atmosphere. Somewhere over international waters, the intercom crackled to life, and the captain's voice broke the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've successfully left U.S. airspace and are cruising at an altitude of 35,000 feet. The weather's clear, and we're on schedule to arrive in the Maldives in just under 8 hours. Thank you for flying with us, and please let our crew know if you require anything." The announcement was met with polite murmurs of acknowledgement. A few passengers glanced out of their windows, where the vast expanse of the ocean was visible under the moonlight. Snoop stretched slightly, appreciating the captain's professionalism and the smooth ride so far. Moments later, to Snoop's mild surprise, the captain stepped out of the cockpit. He was a tall man in his late 40s, with neatly combed hair and an air of authority. He began greeting the passengers, exchanging brief pleasantries as he made his way through the aisle. It seemed like a routine gesture, the kind of personal touch expected on a high-end private flight. When the captain reached Snoop's row, he paused. His eyes lingered a moment too long, and a faint frown creased his face. Snoop removed his sunglasses, offering a polite nod. "Enjoying the flight, sir?" the captain asked, his tone measured but tinged with an edge Snoop couldn't quite place. "Sure am," Snoop replied easily, his signature charisma evident. "Y'all run a tight ship. Appreciate it." But the captain didn't move on. Instead, his gaze hardened and his lips pressed into a thin line. Snoop noticed the change immediately. A subtle but palpable shift in the atmosphere. It was as if the man's demeanor had darkened in an instant. "Well," the captain said, his voice carrying a hint of suspicion, We aim to ensure everyone here belongs. May I ask who you are and why you're on this flight?" Snoop blinked, momentarily caught off guard. I'm Snoop Dogg," he said, gesturing casually toward himself. "Booked the flight fair and square. Everything's in order, my man." The captain's frown deepened, and he crossed his arms. "I see. But you'll forgive me if I don't just take your word for it." The tension in the air grew palpable, and nearby passengers began to take notice. Snoop maintained his calm demeanor, though his jaw tightened slightly. He had encountered his share of doubters and critics, but this was a different kind of hostility. "Look," Snoop said evenly, "you got the paperwork right. Check it. Everything's legit. No need to make a thing out of this." The captain didn't budge. Instead, he glanced around the cabin, as if searching for validation from others. "We'll see about that," he muttered, turning sharply on his heel and disappearing back into the cockpit. Snoop sighed, leaning back in his seat. Something about the interaction gnawed at him, but he resolved not to let it ruin his trip. After all, he had done nothing wrong. This was supposed to be a time for relaxation, not confrontation. The rest of the passengers settled back into their routines, though a few exchanged curious glances. Snoop put his sunglasses back on, closed his eyes and tried to brush off the unsettling exchange. But deep down, a small voice whispered that this might be the start of something far worse. The cabin lights remained dim, and the soothing hum of the engines filled the air. Passengers were either dozing off, watching movies, or chatting in hushed tones. Snoop Dogg leaned back, attempting to relax despite the uneasy feeling that lingered after his encounter with the captain. He scrolled through his phone, replaying beats, trying to keep his mind occupied. Then, the unexpected happened. The intercom crackled once again, and the captain's voice came through, this time more curt. "Mr. Broaddus, please remain seated. I will be speaking with you shortly," the voice announced, echoing through the cabin. Heads turned as passengers glanced toward Snoop's seat. He straightened up, his brow furrowing. This wasn't just unusual. It felt targeted. The murmurs began, and Snoop couldn't help but notice the wary glances being cast his way. Before long, the captain emerged from the cockpit, his face a mask of cold authority. Two flight attendants trailed nervously behind him, clearly uncomfortable. He strode directly to Snoop's seat, his posture rigid and his eyes blazing with something Snoop recognized all too well: thinly veiled hostility. "Mr. Broaddus," the captain began, his voice sharp, "I have some questions regarding your presence on this flight." Snoop exhaled slowly, keeping his composure. "Man, I already told you. I booked this flight fair and square. You can check with the charter company. Everything's legit." The captain's lips curled into a smirk. "You expect me to believe that? A man like you, flying first class on a private jet? Let's be honest here. You don't exactly look the part." Snoop blinked, momentarily stunned by the blatant audacity of the comment. The cabin fell silent, the other passengers frozen, unsure of how to react. "A man like me?" Snoop echoed, his voice calm but edged with disbelief. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what I mean," the captain snapped, leaning in slightly. "You don't belong here. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm not buying it." Snoop sat back, shaking his head slowly. "Listen, I don't know what your problem is, but I've got receipts, paperwork, whatever you need. Just do your job and let me enjoy my flight." But the captain wasn't done. He crossed his arms, his stance aggressive. "I don't care what paperwork you claim to have. People like you, troublemakers, criminals, you're all the same. Think you can buy your way into places you don't belong? Not on my watch." The weight of the words hung in the air, each syllable dripping with venom. Snoop clenched his fists, his patience wearing thin. He had dealt with prejudice before, but this was something else entirely. Brazen, unprovoked hostility in front of an audience. "You don't know me, man," Snoop said, his voice low and steady. "I'm here on my own dime, minding my own business. You're the one making this a thing." The captain leaned closer, his face now inches from Snoop's. "I know enough. You're nothing but a thug with money, and money doesn't buy respect. Not from me." The tension was suffocating. Some passengers began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, while others openly stared. A flight attendant stepped forward hesitantly, her voice trembling. "Captain," she said softly, "perhaps we should—" "Stay out of this," the captain barked, silencing her instantly. Snoop stood up slowly, towering over the captain. Despite the urge to lash out, he kept his composure. "I'm done talking to you. If you got a problem, sort it out with the people who booked this flight. I'm not here for your drama." But the captain wasn't backing down. He jabbed a finger into Snoop's chest, his voice rising. "You think you can intimidate me? You're just another punk who thinks he's above the rules." That was it. The floodgates opened, and the captain launched into a tirade, hurling insult after insult. Words like gangster, drug dealer, and scum echoed through the cabin, each one landing like a blow. Snoop stood frozen, his jaw clenched, refusing to give the man the satisfaction of a reaction. Finally, the captain straightened up, his expression one of smug satisfaction. "I'll deal with this my way," he said coldly before turning on his heel and stalking back to the cockpit. Snoop sank back into his seat, his hands trembling with restrained anger. Around him, the passengers whispered among themselves, their expressions ranging from shock to discomfort. The flight attendants avoided his gaze, clearly unwilling to intervene. Snoop stared out the window, his mind racing. He had come on this trip to escape the pressures of fame, to find some peace. But now, he was trapped in a situation that felt like a cruel parody of the battles he thought he had left behind. The plane continued its smooth journey, but for Snoop, the turbulence had already begun. The cabin felt like it was holding its breath. The captain's words still lingered in the air, their venom poisoning the atmosphere. Snoop sat quietly, his mind racing as he tried to maintain composure. He thought about the other passengers, the staff, and even the pilot himself. How many times had this kind of thing happened before? How many others had endured this without the platform he had to speak out? But before he could fully process his thoughts, the intercom blared again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be making an unscheduled landing at the nearest airstrip due to a safety concern." The announcement sent a ripple of confusion through the cabin. Murmurs began to spread, and passengers exchanged uncertain glances. Snoop, however, knew exactly what this meant. This wasn't about safety. It was personal. Moments later, the captain emerged once again, his expression colder than ever. He strode down the aisle directly toward Snoop, his posture rigid and unyielding. "You," he barked, pointing a finger at Snoop, "get your things. You're getting off this plane." Snoop remained seated, his face calm despite the fury boiling inside him. "Man, I ain't going anywhere. I paid for this flight just like everybody else here." The captain's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. "I said, get up, now, or I'll make you." The tension was unbearable, and the other passengers shrank back, unwilling to intervene. One or two seemed on the verge of speaking up, but the captain's authority and the charged atmosphere kept them silent. When Snoop didn't move, the captain stepped forward, grabbing him by the arm and yanking him roughly out of his seat. "You're a danger to this flight, and I'm not taking any chances." The violence caught Snoop off guard, but he quickly regained his footing. "Danger? The only danger here is you," he said through gritted teeth. The captain's response was swift and brutal. He shoved Snoop hard, sending him stumbling into the aisle. The other passengers gasped, but no one moved. Snoop could see the fear in their eyes. They didn't want to be next. "I'm not gonna fight you," Snoop said, his voice steady despite the pain in his side from the fall. "But you're gonna regret this." The captain smirked, his arrogance on full display. "We'll see about that." The plane began its descent, the cabin tilting slightly as it approached the unknown landing site. Snoop picked himself up, his gaze locked on the captain. He wasn't going to give the man the satisfaction of seeing him broken. When the plane finally landed, the door was thrown open, and the humid air of the jungle-like environment poured in. The captain grabbed Snoop's belongings and tossed them onto the tarmac without a word. "Out," he barked. Snoop stood at the door, glancing out at the unfamiliar landscape. Dense greenery surrounded the small airstrip and the heat was oppressive. He turned back to the captain. "You think this is over?" Snoop said, his voice low and steady. "It ain't." The captain shoved him roughly toward the door. "Get out before I call the authorities." With no choice, Snoop stepped out onto the tarmac. The plane door slammed shut behind him, and within minutes, the engines roared to life. He watched as the aircraft took off, leaving him alone in the middle of nowhere. He stood there, clutching his bag, trying to process what had just happened. The humiliation, the anger, and the sheer disbelief threatened to overwhelm him. For the first time in years, he felt truly powerless. The airstrip was deserted, save for a small shed off to the side. Beyond that, there was nothing but dense jungle and the faint sounds of wildlife. Snoop began to walk, his feet crunching against the gravel as he made his way toward the shed, hoping to find some sign of life. But as he approached, he realized just how isolated he was. The shed was empty, its door hanging loosely on its hinges. The reality of his situation began to sink in. He had been abandoned, left to fend for himself in an unfamiliar place. For hours he wandered aimlessly, the oppressive heat sapping his energy. His clothes were damp with sweat, and his muscles ached from the altercation on the plane. He thought about his family, his fans, and the life he had worked so hard to build. How had it come to this? As night began to fall, the sounds of the jungle grew louder. Snoop found a small clearing and sat down, leaning against a tree. He stared up at the sky, the stars barely visible through the thick canopy of leaves. Despite the fear and exhaustion, he refused to let despair take over. He didn't know how, but he would get out of this. He would make sure the world knew what had happened. And most importantly, he would make that captain pay for what he had done. The humid air clung to Snoop Dogg's skin as the sounds of the jungle filled his ears. Every rustle in the leaves, every distant animal call set his nerves on edge. He was exhausted, bruised, and disoriented. The reality of being abandoned in an unknown land, seemingly in the middle of nowhere, weighed heavily on him. He had no map, no phone service, no idea how far civilization might be. As night deepened, the stars barely pierced the thick canopy above him. His body ached from the captain's violent assault, and his energy was nearly depleted. Still, he pressed on, stumbling through the dense foliage, determined not to give up. After what felt like hours, he spotted a faint light in the distance. Hope sparked in his chest, and he forced himself to move toward it, ignoring the sharp pain in his legs. As he got closer, the light grew brighter, revealing a small cluster of huts. The area was alive with activity. Laughter, music, and the sound of drums echoed through the night air. Snoop hesitated for a moment, unsure of how the locals would react to a stranger appearing out of the jungle. But he had no other options. Summoning his last reserves of strength, he stepped into the clearing, his hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. The music stopped abruptly as the villagers turned to look at him. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a young man near the edge of the group gasped, his eyes widening in recognition. "Yo, is that Snoop Dogg?" he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. The tension broke immediately. A chorus of murmurs and exclamations spread through the crowd as people began to gather around him. Some held their phones up, snapping pictures and recording videos. Others simply stared, their faces a mix of awe and concern. "You're Snoop Dogg," one of the villagers exclaimed, stepping forward. He was a tall, muscular man with a friendly smile. "What are you doing here, man? You look like you've been through hell." Snoop gave a tired chuckle, lowering his hands. "Yeah, something like that. Got thrown out of a plane by a racist pilot. Now, I'm just trying to get home." The villagers exchanged shocked glances, their expressions quickly hardening into outrage. The tall man clapped a hand on Snoop's shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. "You're safe now, brother," he said. "We'll take care of you. Come on, let's get you cleaned up." Snoop was led to one of the larger huts where a group of women immediately began tending to his injuries. They worked with gentle efficiency, cleaning the cuts on his arms and face while offering him water and food. He ate slowly, his body too exhausted to do much more than nod his thanks. As word spread, more villagers arrived to see him. They brought gifts, small tokens of appreciation and respect. Snoop was overwhelmed by their kindness. Despite his situation, he felt a sense of comfort and belonging that he hadn't expected. The tall man, who introduced himself as Jamal, returned with a group of others who appeared to be community leaders. They sat with Snoop, listening intently as he recounted the events of the flight. "That pilot's gotta pay for what he did," Jamal said, his voice firm. "But first, we're getting you back home. Don't worry about a thing. We'll handle everything." Over the next few days, the villagers went above and beyond to help Snoop. They contacted local authorities, arranged transportation, and even pooled their resources to cover the cost of his flight back to the United States. Before he left, they threw a celebration in his honor. The clearing was transformed into a lively gathering with music, dancing, and food. Snoop, still recovering but in much better spirits, joined in, sharing stories and laughter with his newfound friends. As he boarded the plane they had arranged for him, he turned to Jamal and the others who had come to see him off. "Y'all didn't have to do all this," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "I'll never forget what you did for me. Thank you." Jamal grinned, clapping him on the back. "Just remember, you've got family here now. Anytime you need us, we've got your back." The flight back to the United States was uneventful, a stark contrast to the nightmare that had brought him to the jungle. As Snoop stared out the window, watching the clouds roll by, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just going to let this incident slide. The world needed to know what had happened, and that captain needed to face justice. By the time the plane landed, Snoop was ready. He stepped onto the tarmac with a plan forming in his mind. The battle wasn't over. Not by long shot. As the wheels of the plane touched down on U.S. soil, Snoop Dogg felt a surge of relief mixed with determination. The familiar skyline came into view through the cabin window, a reminder that he was back in his territory. But this wasn't just a return. It was the beginning of his fight for justice. Snoop stepped off the plane, a slight limp in his step, his body still aching from the ordeal. A small crowd had gathered near the airport, most of them fans who had caught wind of his unexpected absence through social media. As soon as they saw him, the cheers began. Some held signs that read, "Welcome home, Snoop," while others snapped photos, their faces lighting up with excitement. "Good to be back," he muttered under his breath, forcing a smile as he waved to the crowd. Waiting just outside the terminal was his manager, Kevin, his face etched with a mix of worry and anger. As soon as Snoop approached, Kevin pulled him into a brief, tight hug. "Man, you good?" Kevin asked, stepping back to look him over. "We heard some crazy stuff. What happened out there?" Snoop sighed, running a hand over his face. "It's a long story, Kev. That pilot," he snapped, "racist as hell. Threw me off the damn plane in the middle of nowhere. If it wasn't for some real ones out there, I'd still be stuck." Kevin's jaw tightened, his fists clenching. "You serious? This isn't just bad, it's criminal. We gotta make moves, Snoop. We can't let this slide." "Already on it," Snoop said, his tone resolute. "Get the legal team ready. I'm taking this public." The ride back to his house was quiet, save for the occasional beep of Kevin's phone as he coordinated with lawyers, PR reps, and media contacts. Snoop stared out the window, his mind replaying the events of the flight. Every insult, every shove, every ounce of humiliation, it all fueled his resolve. Once home, he went straight to his office. Kevin set up a camera, and within minutes, Snoop was live on all his social media platforms. His followers, millions strong, poured into the stream, flooding the chat with messages of concern and support. Snoop adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and began. "Yo, what's up, everybody? It's your boy Snoop. I know y'all been wondering where I've been the past few days, and I gotta tell you, it ain't a story I ever thought I'd have to share. But I need y'all to hear this." He recounted everything. The captain's hostility, the violent confrontation, being abandoned in the jungle, and the kindness of the locals who saved him. His voice remained steady, but the raw emotion was evident. By the time he finished, the chat was exploding with outrage. "We ain't taking this anymore," Snoop said, leaning closer to the camera. "That man thought he could get away with this 'cause of what I look like. Nah, not today. We gon' fight back, and we gon' make sure this don't happen to nobody else." The response was immediate. His video went viral within hours, trending on every major platform. Celebrities, activists, and fans alike rallied behind him, their messages of support flooding social media. The hashtag #JusticeForSnoop began to dominate timelines, sparking a nationwide conversation about racial discrimination in air travel. Meanwhile, Kevin worked tirelessly behind the scenes, assembling a top-tier legal team. A lawsuit was filed against the pilot and the airline within 48 hours. The media picked up the story, and soon news outlets across the country were covering the incident. "This isn't just about Snoop Dogg," one reporter said during a broadcast. "This is about systemic issues that have been ignored for far too long." As the days passed, the pressure on the airline mounted. Executives scrambled to issue statements, distancing themselves from the pilot's actions. But the public wasn't satisfied with words. They wanted accountability. Snoop, however, remained focused. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was about sending a message to anyone who thought they could discriminate without consequences. And, as he prepared for the legal battle ahead, He felt the weight of millions of voices behind him, demanding justice. The courtroom was packed, every seat occupied by journalists, activists, and curious onlookers who had followed the case from its explosive beginning. Cameras lined the entrance, capturing every moment of Snoop Dogg's arrival as he stepped out of a sleek black SUV, flanked by his legal team. His expression was calm but resolute, a man determined to see justice served. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The pilot, Captain Richard Wallace, sat stiffly at the defendant's table, his face pale and his demeanor defiant. His legal team whispered among themselves, occasionally glancing nervously toward the packed gallery. Across from them, Snoop's team was the picture of confidence. Leading the charge was a renowned civil rights attorney, a sharp woman with a commanding presence who had taken the case with the same determination as her client. The trial began with opening statements. Wallace's defense team painted him as a professional who had acted out of concern for the safety of the passengers, claiming that Snoop's behavior had been suspicious, but their argument faltered under scrutiny. Snoop's lawyer took the floor, dismantling their claims with precision. "This is not a case about safety," she declared, her voice ringing through the courtroom. "This is a case about prejudice, about a man who abused his power to humiliate and endanger a passenger, based on nothing but the color of his skin." The prosecution presented damning evidence, including witness testimonies from other passengers. Several of them described the captain's aggressive behavior, his demeaning language, and his refusal to listen to reason. One passenger, a middle-aged businessman, recounted how the captain had singled Snoop out before even speaking to anyone else on the flight. "He didn't even give the man a chance," the witness said. "It was clear from the start that he had made up his mind about Mr. Broaddus." But the turning point came when the flight attendants were called to testify. Initially hesitant, they finally recounted how they had witnessed the captain's actions and admitted feeling powerless to intervene. One of them broke down in tears, describing how she had seen the captain shove Snoop and later abandon him on the tarmac. "I knew it was wrong," she said, her voice shaking, "but he was the captain. I was scared." As the trial continued, the defense grew increasingly desperate. They attempted to discredit Snoop, bringing up old controversies and questioning his character. But the strategy backfired spectacularly. Snoop's lawyer responded with calm efficiency, redirecting the focus to the incident at hand. "Mr. Broaddus is not on trial here," she said firmly. "What is on trial is the blatant abuse of authority and the racism that fueled it." The final blow came when the prosecution revealed video footage from the airport where Snoop had been abandoned. Security cameras had captured everything. The captain throwing Snoop's belongings onto the tarmac, shoving him toward the exit, and leaving him stranded in an isolated area. The jury watched in stunned silence as the footage played, the evidence undeniable. By the time closing arguments were made, the case was all but decided. Snoop's lawyer delivered a powerful speech, emphasizing the broader implications of the trial. "This case is about more than one man's experience," she said. "It's about ensuring that no one else has to endure the humiliation and danger that Mr. Broaddus faced. It's about holding those in power accountable for their actions." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with their verdict. Wallace was found guilty of multiple charges, including assault and unlawful endangerment. The courtroom erupted in applause as the judge delivered the sentence: a permanent revocation of his pilot's license and a significant prison term. Outside the courthouse, the scene was electric. Supporters cheered as Snoop emerged, raising a hand in gratitude. Reporters clamored for statements, but Snoop kept his words brief and powerful. "This ain't just about me," he said, his voice steady. "This is about all of us. Justice has been served, and we're gonna keep fighting until it's served for everybody." The moment went viral, solidifying Snoop's place not just as a cultural icon, but as a symbol of resilience and justice. As the crowd celebrated, Snoop felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The fight had been hard, but it was worth it. The battle wasn't over. He knew there was still work to be done. But for now, justice had prevailed, and that was a victory worth savoring. The private jet cruised smoothly at 35,000 feet, its cabin filled with an air of quiet celebration. Snoop Dogg leaned back in his seat, a glass of champagne in hand, gazing out at the vast expanse of blue sky. This time, there was no tension, no hostility, only peace and the satisfaction of victory. The events of the past weeks had been a whirlwind. The trial, the media frenzy, the overwhelming public support. The fight had been draining, but it was worth it. The airline's public apology had come with a formal commitment to overhaul its diversity training and policies. A captain was not only behind bars, but also symbol of what happens when prejudice goes unchecked. Justice had been served, and the world had taken notice. Snoop's legal team, along with Kevin and a few close friends, sat nearby, toasting to the win. The atmosphere was celebratory, but not overindulgent. There was still a sense of purpose, a recognition that this victory was part of a larger fight. "Cheers to the real ones," Snoop said, raising his glass. "Y'all had my back through all this. Couldn't have done it without you." Kevin smirked. "Nah, man, this was all you. We just made sure the world was watching." The group laughed, clinking their glasses together. Despite the light-hearted banter, there was a shared understanding of the gravity of what had been accomplished. As the jet neared its destination, the crew approached Snoop with wide smiles. The pilot, a middle-aged black woman with a calm demeanor, extended her hand. "Mr. Broaddus," she said warmly, "it's an honor to have you on board. We're about 30 minutes out from the Maldives. Let us know if there's anything else we can do to make your flight more comfortable." Snoop shook her hand, appreciating the contrast between this moment and the nightmare of his previous journey. "Appreciate you, Captain. Y'all already done more than enough." The final descent was breathtaking, the turquoise waters and white sand beaches of the Maldives coming into view. Snoop couldn't help but smile. This was a trip he had been dreaming of, and now he could enjoy it fully, knowing he had turned a moment of humiliation into a powerful statement. The plane touched down smoothly, and as Snoop stepped onto the tarmac, the warm tropical breeze greeted him. Waiting for him were resort staff with garlands of flowers and bright smiles, ready to welcome their VIP guest. Cameras were nowhere in sight. This was a private retreat, just as he had planned. As he was escorted to a sleek golf cart, Snoop took a moment to reflect. The ordeal had tested him in ways he hadn't expected, but it had also reminded him of his resilience and the importance of using his platform for good. The cart pulled up to his villa, an expansive beachfront property with a private pool and direct access to the ocean. Snoop stepped inside, taking in the luxury and tranquility of the space. He set his bags down, walked to the edge of the patio, and gazed out at the horizon. Pulling out his phone, he recorded a short video. "What's up, y'all?" he said, his voice steady and confident. "Just touched down in paradise. Gotta say, it feels good to be here, but it feels even better knowing we made some real change. Shout out to everybody who stood with me. This ain't just my win, it's ours. Stay strong, stay real, and keep fighting the good fight." He uploaded the video and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the air, a soothing rhythm that matched the steady beating of his heart. Finally, he could relax. The battle was behind him, but its impact would last far beyond the courtroom. For now, though, it was time to enjoy the moment, to savor the peace he had fought so hard to reclaim. Snoop stepped into the warm sand, the ocean beckoning him forward. With each step, the weight of the past week seemed to fall away, replaced by the lightness of triumph and renewal. The future was bright, and Snoop was ready for whatever came next. Thank you for watching. This story reminds us of the importance of standing against injustice. If this resonated with you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with more powerful stories. Let us know where you're watching from.